Good morning. It is Monday, May the 6th, 2024. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Well, there's a couple of very important stories I'd like to go over, which everybody's been probably following. That is the crackdown of the anti-Israeli protests that are going on, or were going on in most cases, in some cases still going on at universities throughout the United States and throughout Europe and other parts of the world. The crackdown that's occurred is reminiscent of something you'd see in the Vietnam era, although not as violent as what you had back then. Still, it was rather disturbing to see. Now, there's a lot of people that are very divided on this subject, and I find it rather disturbing and annoying that events that are happening in another part of the world are being played up by the so-called America First crowd. But let's just take a look at what was going on here. Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, was telling the people he was very disturbed at American universities and the protests, and sure enough, a few days later, well, the cops come in riot gear with pepper spray and truncheons and hauled people off. However, what I really found disturbing was what I saw at one of them was that when UCLA was cracked down on, they took all the students one at a time who'd been occupying a building and marched them right out in front of the cameras. No doubt so that they would be completely identified and targeted, or what we are calling January 6th. They are probably going to be given that sort of treatment. I don't think they're going to be let off like protesters have been for decades with a slap on the wrist saying, don't do that and go back to school. I think that the powers that be, considering how quickly they moved to silence criticism of Israel, which is what this is, I have a bad feeling that these kids are going to get a lot worse than they deserve. I'm not a big fan of people stopping traffic or, holding stupid protests. But then again, kids are kids. And I doubt anybody who is my age now thinks the same way they did when they were 20 or 21. It's called evolution. It's called growing up. And you have to be a little bit forgiving with people. But at the same time, I think all the pictures and video of children and families being massacred in Gaza, which by many standards is way beyond the necessary level of force that Israel had to exert after it was attacked. And it was attacked by a rather nasty group of people. But it's important to also know that there are limits, and it's also important to know that when two combatives want to fight it out, they should be allowed to do that. And getting involved in that is also something that is causing us all sorts of mayhem in this country. I see people arguing with each other over this the way they were arguing over Trump, with the predictable results. Family members aren't talking to each other. That sort of nonsense, which at the end of the day is not really worth it. Now, this leads me on to another thing which I find repulsive, as do many Americans of all sorts of ethnic and racial backgrounds, including Jewish, and this is House Resolution 6090, which is otherwise known as the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2023. Now, I did spend some time going over this thing, and it's not, most people are just reading what people are saying about it. What they're doing is they're coming up with a more focused enforcement of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They were using that as the basis of this thing. And, of course, the way it's being put out there is obviously in reaction to all the criticism that Israel has been getting and all the protests. They're trying to make it illegal to be critical of Israel and its policies and equate that with anti-Semitism, which at the same time, even though most people would find that repulsive, just like all other forms of bigotry, people have a right to be bigots, like it or not. It's not something you have to give people a job over. It's not something you have to allow your daughter to go marry. But at the same time, freedom of speech is a real important thing. And this is something a lot of people have lost track of. Now, all these kids that are 20 years old, I don't think they're going to think the same way they will when they're my age, which is into the 60s. they're going to be very different. It's called growing up. In the 1960s, there were many groups that later on changed their mind. Many members of the Black Panther movement that was rather famous in the 1960s, a totally different group than the one that uses that name today. Some of their members went off to be very conservative Republicans. You see, the thing about freedom of speech, it's a way to vet ideas. It's a way to throw ideas out there and determine whether or not they should sink or swim. It's an important way to come up with new ideas. Now, if somebody comes up and says something totally ridiculous, well, I'm probably not going to show it much respect. I'm not necessarily going to like that person, but as long as they're not advocating or planning for violence or destruction or something like that, yeah, go along with it. Just, okay, that's what they want to believe, fine. I don't have to associate with it. You have to give people the space to be wrong. Let me say that again. You have to give people the space to be wrong. You have to give people the space to grow. If you make something illegal for thinking it or saying it, you're not going to give anyone the space to be wrong. And if you punish them for it, they're never going to change their mind. If you cancel people because of an idea you don't agree with, there's no hope to ever win them over to something new. This is what we're seeing now with people that have rather extreme beliefs by most standards, and because they've been forced out of their jobs, because they've been forced out of their families, they've been forced into the street in many cases, they're never going to give up those beliefs, and they will probably die for those beliefs. And you don't want fanatics, because fanatics tend to cause an awful lot of trouble. Let me tell you the story of a very interesting man named Professor Thomas Sowell of Stanford University. He's known to a lot of people in conservative political movements. Arguably, if you ask me, I think he's one of the most brilliant Americans who's lived in the last 100 years. He's a black man. He's what would be generally termed African American. And he's probably one of the best economic minds and best authors on the subject of economics, race, politics that has been around in a very long time. He's about 94, I believe. Probably won't be with us very long. You can see his lectures up on YouTube. Now, back in the 1950s, Dr. Sowell was a Marxist. He was into Marxism. He was into, power of the proletariat, all that other crap. But I believe the story he tells it is he went to work for the U.S. government for one summer and changed his mind. He went from being a Marxist to being arguably the best or one of the best advocates for the free market economy that's been around in decades. And he was asked once in an interview, why did he change his mind? And he had a one-word answer to that, and it was facts. Now, let's say back in the 1950s, he was canceled. He was not allowed to exercise or explore different viewpoints, different feelings, different ideas. He would have probably ended up as a black radical, possibly in prison, probably killed. And we would have lost one of our best economic and literary minds of the latter half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. So, that being said, whenever you stifle an idea, whenever you make it a crime to question anything or analyze some part of history, or if you want to criticize a foreign country, one that arguably has a dubious relationship with the United States, and that is, of course, Israel. It's not exactly been the closest of friends or the closest of allies. They've done a lot of things that a lot of Americans, including myself, don't agree with. Doesn't mean we should line everyone up against a wall and shoot them. Let me put it to you this way. If it is anti-Semitic to be critical of Israel, what about those Hasidic Jewish sects? There are several that think Israel, according to their religious interpretation, is a blasphemy because it was not created by God or the Messiah or something like that thing. I'm not an expert at the religion there, but I do know enough about those groups. They are very anti-Israel. You will find these Jewish Hasidic groups showing up at pro-Palestinian protests. You'll see them at ceremonies where they're burning the Israeli flag. Are they anti-Semitic? There's a lot of Jewish groups that are against this law, by the way. There are many members of Congress who voted against it who are Jewish, saying this is too much. So if the Senate does pass this thing, and given how much money is being flung around by the Israeli lobby, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. This could prove to be a real undoing of our way of life. We've already been under attack for free speech with the blasphemy known as hate speech, which is just a way to sneak in and claim that what you're saying is harmful or detrimental or something. Hate speech, I'm sorry, folks, is a nonsensical concept. At least one that it's speech. It might be speech you disagree with. It might be speech that almost all of us disagree with, but it's still speech. And if we continue on this path, it's not a slippery slope we're looking at. We're looking at a dive into an abyss of which there will be no recovery, at least nothing we would perceive as a recovery. So what I'm going to ask people to do is contact your senator. We've talked about that a few times. Your senators, excuse me, plural. There's 2 for each state. And call them up and let them know how you feel. Don't waste the time with a letter right now. Give a call, because this is coming to a vote pretty soon. And call them up and say, this is wrong. If you're Jewish, be sure to mention that. I think that'll have an impact. And let them know that you do not want to see your country destroyed any further than it's been destroyed. You want to see it recovered. And this could be the pivot point where we say enough, and we're going to turn away from this. What we're going to have to do is really rally around the flag, quite literally, and say enough. If this bill is passed into law, if it makes it onto the books, and we start seeing people fired, sued, possibly prosecuted if it's done right, given what's happening to former President Trump, it's quite easy to see that if a prosecutor really wants to get you, they can get you. We've got to stop allowing foreign intervention in our legislative affairs of the kind that underscores tyranny and undermines our entire way of life before it's degraded any further. And of all the stories going on in the world, this is probably the most important and most relevant to anyone who has a brain that they wish to continue exercising freely and without intimidation. Okay, that's it for today. If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe. Consider a paid subscription or a gift subscription to someone. Donations are also accepted. And if you wish to contact me, I can be contacted on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. You can also get me at my email address, which is feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I like feedback, and I like to hear what people have to say and come up with suggestions. Anyways, that's it for today. I wish you well. I wish you peace. I wish you happiness. Be good, be safe, be vigilant, and good day.